Hello, it's Christy Gray, your newest hype girl and astrologer. Welcome to the Cosmic Hotline.
Hi, gorgeous, and welcome to this week's episode of the Cosmic Hotline. And this is our first expert takeover of 2023. This week, you are joined by Kim Akrigg. Kim is a hypnotherapist for entrepreneurs. She's a psychologist in training, and she's host of Kim Akrigg, the podcast. Kim is my friend. She's an Aquarius, as she is just as obsessed with astrology as I am. In this episode, it's a big one, so I'm going to keep the intro really short this week. Half of the episode, we dive into relationships and intimacy and how we can sometimes struggle to connect with people, and we view this through a psychology lens. And then the second half of this episode, we start to dive into some of the astrology behind it. Obviously, I wish that I could dive into this more. So if you love this episode, please send a message to me. Let me know. I'm always up for a part 2. I tried to keep this one short, but it's actually our longest episode on the podcast. So if you do love it and you want more, please let us know. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to hand over the mic to Kim. I've been wanting to have a conversation about sex and intimacy for a really long time on the Cosmic Hotline. And it's so weird. Sex is one of these taboo topics. And I think it's because of, I don't know, history, maybe. But I've been wanting to have this conversation. And as soon as I thought, you know what, it's ready, we're ready on the Cosmic Hotline, I have to invite one of my besties on, Kim, not only because Kim is studying to become a psychologist, she's also just as astro obsessed as me. So welcome to the Cosmic Hotline, Kim.
Thank you for having me. So excited to be here.
Oh, can you share with everyone, because I don't want to harp on about everything that I know about you, because I want you to be able to give everyone the real deal Kim introduction. So who are you? What's your story?
Such a big question. So I'm Kim, and I'm a hypnotherapist for entrepreneurs. And like Christy said, I am studying to be a clinical psychologist. I'm halfway through that degree. I'm also a podcaster. And yeah, I'd say that kind of sums it up.
Love it. Tell us a little bit actually about your natal chart and astrology, because that's actually a really interesting conversation in itself.
Oh my God, totally. It's so funny because it's like I'm an Aquarius sun, I'm a Sagittarius rising, and then my moon is in Aries, which is the same as Christy. And pretty much every single other placement I have is in Capricorn and in the second house. So I feel it's really interesting because it's on the surface, I feel I really appear this one way, but then once you get to know me, I feel that Capricorn stellium comes out very strongly. I'm very ambitious, super hardworking, very disciplined. I love having a goal and I love reaching for it. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting natal chart to have. It makes it very hard to relax, I will say that, but it also makes you goal-oriented and action-oriented, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you recognize that and you honor that, because it is such a big piece of who you are. For me, the second house represents money, manifestation, and mastery. And I see that in you, whether it is about what you're talking about or how you can make your dreams a reality. You're always working towards and building something. But I love that you help other people to do that too.
Yeah, it's so funny that you mentioned that because that's literally the title of one of my courses is Money Manifestation Mastery. So it's funny that you mentioned that because it literally is all about that. It's about working on your money mindset and how to basically clear out those subconscious blocks that block you from making money, because it is something that a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with. And I think a lot of people, when they start a business and they're like, oh, I really want to make money, they don't realize that your beliefs about money actually like affect you a lot in how you attract that in and how you show up for clients and so on and so forth.
Yeah, having the beautiful blend of the Aquarius energy with Capricorn energy, because I actually only had a client yesterday. So she is an Aquarius sun with a Capricorn stellium, placed in a very different way than you. But we had the same conversation around Aquarians change the world in the sense of you think beyond the day to day because you are really good at tapping into thinking differently and blue sky thinking. But when you have so much Capricorn in your chart, it allows you to make it tangible. Because I do find if somebody has a lot of Aquarius in their chart, but they might not have a lot of Earth, they struggle with going, okay, how do I make these dreams a reality?
Oh my God, 100%. Sometimes I'm really grateful that there is so much earth in my chart, because if I really lean into that Aquarian energy, I can just float off and be fully on my own planet and very happy to exist there. And I never want to come down to earth. So I think it's good having the balance of having all that Capricorn, because it does allow me to sort of, I don't know, like interact with the people, but also make my goals and my visions more planted in reality, and not just make it so that I just think about things, but also so that I do action on them and I create plans of how I'm going to achieve that, instead of just dreaming up all this stuff, but then never bringing it to fruition.
Yeah, which is so important. I suppose on the other side of the coin, and sure, my natal chart is different than yours, but I know we have very similar.
Mm-hmm.
We have very similar behaviors and we're very relentless. It's like we get to the top of our mountain and we're excited for a moment, but then we're like, oh, I want to climb another one.
Yeah, 100%. There is no resting at the top of the mountain. There's always, okay, I'm here for a second, on to the next thing, which I think is one of the things I think I've had to learn in this lifetime, because it's, if I don't achieve something in the time frame that I think that I should, I'm so hard on myself and so relentless, but I sometimes don't recognize the things I have achieved, because I'm just like, okay, well, that happened, on to the next thing. Of course that was going to happen. And you don't take a moment to recognize yourself for it, which is something that's so important.
Yeah, I'm working on it with my therapist. So, but not in a bad way. It's just more about how can you appreciate more of where you're at rather than constantly searching for the next thing. But it's
Yeah.
not that I'm feeling unfulfilled. See, that's the juxtaposition. I
Yeah.
actually feel really fulfilled with the
Yeah.
life I've created, but I think there's still an opportunity to sit in the discomfort of knowing that there doesn't always have to be another thing to strive towards.
Yeah, and that was one of the things I actually found really interesting studying positive psychology in first year. So much of it is about mindfulness. And I think, especially as an Aquarius, I'm very future oriented. I don't usually dwell on the past too much. I'm not usually living in the past. I'm not obsessed with it. I feel like Scorpio energy is so obsessed with the past, but Aquarian energy is quite future oriented. So it's like I am always kind of looking to the next thing, but it does make it really hard to be mindful of the present moment, because you kind of almost aren't anchored in it because you're so focused on the future. But mindfulness practices have sort of helped me become more aware. Okay, the moment you're in is actually a good moment to be in, and you can't be in any other moment. So you need to sort of learn to be where you're at as well, because it's all unfolding as it's supposed to.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't always live that way, but I'm trying.
But you know what? I think that's the whole thing, right? Is that perfection doesn't exist and all you can do is try.
Yeah. Awareness is the first step.
Absolutely. Before we dive into sex and intimacy and relationships, I'm curious because moving into your third year of clinical psychology, what's been the biggest change you've seen within yourself and learned about yourself?
That's such a good question. I think one of the biggest things that kind of changed for me was realizing that I'm a lot more capable than maybe I thought that I was before. I'd never had any university experience before studying psychology. Like, I've very much always just been, I'll just learn it on YouTube kind of girl, and taught myself, which you obviously can't really do with a psychology degree. So I think the biggest thing was that I can do hard things and how to manage that, and how to like almost be more intentional with my time, realizing, okay, this thing is going to take this much time, this much energy. You honestly can't do everything all at once because you'll burn out. So it's how can I allocate my energy and learn to say no to things that aren't going to give me energy or help me towards my goal. I think I became a lot better at saying no to people since I started. And I guess the other thing, aside from what I was learning in my classes, I think I've just learned a lot more about how to learn. I don't think that's necessarily something we're ever taught when we go to school. It's very much, oh, you have to learn in this way. But I really realized seeing what I did well in, how I ended up doing well in that. I think it really helped teach me how to be a better learner and how to be more disciplined, I guess. I've never really struggled with like procrastination per se, but I've definitely learned a lot more about how to be disciplined and how to create a routine for myself so that I'm able to succeed at doing something that's really challenging. Like all these things that I think that nobody really teaches you when you're growing up. Nobody teaches you how to create a schedule and a routine that works for you and is because it's always so individual. I think sometimes people are given this really weird generic advice or they're like, you just have to work hard. And it's what does that actually mean? I think it's more about working intentionally. And I think the biggest thing was also just noticing maybe this isn't groundbreaking, but what you believe about what you're doing determines so much more of your experience of it. And just having other people that I go to school with and them just being like, oh, I'm not going to do well at this, or this is really hard. There's no way I'm going to figure this out. I'm not even going to bother with this. Just even the language that they were using, I really became aware of how much that really does influence your experience. And it's something that I've been working a lot on trying to catch myself doing. If there's something where it's hard, I'm like, okay, well, this is difficult, but I'll figure it out. Or also asking for help. Using all the resources around you and realizing that you've never done this before. So that doesn't mean that you're a failure. It just means that you need to ask people for help because other people who are stupider than you have figured out how to do this before. So you can do it too, which sounds maybe mean, but I think it's more just to build that confidence in yourself that other people have figured out how to do this. So you can figure it out as well.
Okay, so if I've sparked your curiosity in this episode and you're keen to learn more, the best place to start is Astrology Unlocked. We'll explore how you can start stepping into the vibration of your higher self by diving into your key astrological placements and unpacking what they might have in store for you. When you know the foundations of your natal chart, you have the power to unlock so many opportunities for growth, expansion, and joy. You'll find Astrology Unlocked and access to my calendar to book your first session on my website, or send me an email, babe, at hello@christygray.com, as I'd love to hear from you. And of course, I'm always here to answer your questions. As I mentioned before, I was really excited to have this conversation. And for a couple of different reasons is that I love exploring things, but I think I learn a lot about myself and how I show up in a relationship when I started exploring astrology. Because if I look at my natal chart, and just to give some examples before we dive into this for everybody, because I want to talk about fear of intimacy in relationships to really kick this off, as my partnerships house is ruled by Aquarius. So what that can sometimes speak into is that I need a lot of freedom in my relationships. And I didn't know that. I actually thought for a long time I was anxious avoidant because I've been single for 10 years, really. I went through planning a wedding in my 20s. I was literally about to, sign, seal, and deliver that, and then decided that that wasn't the path that I wanted to go down. And then I went on a big self-discovery journey. So it's not like I've never been in a relationship. I've been in some pretty rock solid relationships, but I also then was trying to work on myself. So I felt that at the time, and I feel I'm only just now in the last couple of years really exploring dating again and what that looks like to welcome somebody into my life. But if I didn't know, obviously it's not just because of what my partnership's house is ruled by, but just purely based on the rest of my natal chart, is that if I didn't have that knowledge, I actually would have thought that there was probably something wrong with me, because a lot of people do a lot of growing in relationships. Whereas for me, I actually grow as a person. It doesn't mean I can't. I think you grow in both in a relationship and individually. But a lot of the path that I've had to walk in this lifetime has been solo. And that's actually okay, but society tells us otherwise. And I think too, I always have lots of friends and clients asking me, are you dating? And I almost feel guilty because it's like I have to come up with something. Love to welcome in a partner, and I'm definitely working on it. I have some epic hinge conversations going on at the moment. But timing is everything. And so I think that that was a big element for me, is astrology helped me gain radical self-acceptance, which I love.
Yeah. Oh my God, 100%. And I think it's so important having the self-awareness first before you want to bring someone else into the thing. Because I think even if I just look at myself, because I have a Capricorn Venus. So when I date someone, it's I want to build an empire with them. Even if we're not necessarily building a business together, I want to build something really solid. I want to feel really secure in that relationship. Not that I would say it's not I'm a gold digger or something, and it's not like I would purely date someone based on their job, but it is important for me to be with someone who loves what they're doing and is successful is such a hard word to say because success can mean so many different things, but it's important for them to be quote unquote successful at it. I don't want to date anyone who hates what they're doing or isn't on a path to something that they love. And I found I often dated partners who are usually around 10 years older than me because they're usually more set in what they're doing. And for me, that provides safety and security while I just go around doing my billion different things that I'm doing. But the same as you, I'm an Aquarius sun. While I want to have that safety and security and trust and a strong partnership, I also need a lot of freedom to go and do all the random shit that I want to do because I don't like feeling boxed in and I hate feeling like you're the kind of person that always has to be with your partner. That's just not me. I'm so happy for us to go and do our things. And then when we're together, we're together. And so knowing that makes such a huge difference for the kind of person that you want to have in your life.
Absolutely. And it does. It helps you, like when I'm working with a client and we're looking at their natal chart, and especially if they're single too, or even if they are in a relationship, but things are maybe a little rockier than normal. And I'll go, okay, well, let's go back to basics. Let's actually explore what do you require in a relationship to feel fulfilled? Because I think it always starts and stops with you. Because I think that's what we tend to do is we put a lot of pressure on and expectations on people trying to meet our emotional needs. And we can't do that because at the end of the day, we have to be able to work out how can we meet our own emotional needs, but also ask for support. And it should be a cherry on top type of situation.
Oh my God, 100%. I think you have to really be able to fulfill that. There's some things I think that you can only get from a partnership, but for the most part, it's I think 80% of the way, at least you need to be able to fulfill those emotional requirements for yourself. You're not looking to that person to validate you. You're not looking to them to build your self-worth. It's not looking to them for a sense of identity or you having this partnership is going to mean a certain thing. You really need to be able to give yourself like you have to be a whole person on your own before you can expect that another person is going to fulfill that for you.
Absolutely. It's just so interesting because we all operate, differently in the world and we're all experiencing the world differently too. And I just love the fact that when you start to explore more about your natal chart or astrology or even your beliefs around how you want a relationship or how you show up in a relationship, it just gives you a whole another dimension of self-awareness and helps you to be, I suppose, a better human being at the end of the day.
Yeah, oh my God, 100%. And also having that awareness that usually our for what relationships look often comes from our parents' relationship or maybe close family relationships, but more so our parents, because we see them growing up, we're around them all the time. And when you're little, you start to sort of be like, oh, okay, that's what a relationship is supposed to look for better or worse. And I think a lot of the time people don't realize how deep that programming can go. And so then they're sort of either interacting out of a way of either trying to achieve or almost avoid whatever they saw their parents had, depending what that dynamic was, or they find themselves repeating that same pattern of what they had because that's what they think that love is.
That's so interesting. So why do people have a fear of intimacy in relationships? Where does this come from?
Oh my God, this is such a good question because you kind of touched on attachment styles before, which I think it's worth mentioning because I think it really boils down to trust. And so this is trust of that you're safe, trust of initially your caregivers, that they're there for you. They're going to show up for you, that when they say they're going to be there, they are there. Because when you're younger, it's about survival. If you can't trust your caregivers, that's a really scary place to be in. And so I think it almost starts from so young. How did you attach with your parents? And of course, not everything comes down to attachment style. Because going back to what we were talking about before with things I learned at uni, one of the things I thought was most interesting was the process of learning about critical thinking. When you're reading all these studies, you have to sort of be, okay, where's this person coming from? What's their intention? What are they like? So on and so forth. And I remember I was having a conversation with one of my tutors and we were talking about attachment styles. And the guy who came up with attachment styles, he sort of based what he learned off of ducks. You know, the way that ducks will imprint on the first thing they see, basically. So yes, we can take this knowledge of what we sort of know about attachment styles and also be aware that most humans don't fit into 4 categories perfectly. And also the way that you attach to another partner as an adult is going to maybe be dependent on the stage of life you're at, the partner. So many other variables go about it. And so instead of just being like, oh, I'm anxious avoidant, I'm never going to find a relationship, we don't want to be that fatalistic with it, because it's acknowledging that it can change. It's just another tool of being aware of maybe how we're showing up in relationships. But I think it really starts when you're young, and how you attach to the caregivers around you. Are people there for you? Do you learn that you can trust people? And it kind of really starts there, because then I think when we look at a lot of people who are avoidant of relationships, it kind of comes down to either they don't believe they're worthy of love, they think that love is going to be painful, they're associating it with all of these negative things. And so if they're not willing to look at that, then they're probably not going to change it. But a lot of the times, if people haven't done a lot of self-inquiry, they won't realize that that's what's going on, because maybe they'll be like, oh, I just want to hook up with a lot of people. Not that I think there's anything wrong with that, but it's kind of comes down to, why are you doing it? What are you hoping to achieve out of having that experience? So I think a lot of the time, it's at the end of the day, people just don't want to get hurt, is what it really boils down to. And in their mind, they associate being attached to someone else with pain. And your mind always wants to avoid being in pain. So it's going to do everything it can do to get you out of that situation.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I've been probably exploring for myself personally over the last couple of years how I show up in relationships, and not just from an intimate perspective, but also friendships as well. Definitely for me, and it would make sense too, just purely based on my upbringing and my relationship with my family, and feeling a sense of abandonment, especially as a child from my relationship with my father. What I would tend to do is, if something became hard, or if I felt somebody was either not living up to my expectations when I was a teenager, or even in my 20s, I would be the one to either sever the relationship or run away from the relationship before it got too bad, because of the fact that was my way of protecting myself, because I didn't want to get hurt. So it was just easier if I did it.
Yeah.
And then what you mentioned before is that I also slept around a lot. In my 20s, I just was in such a place of low self-worth, because I didn't have even a great relationship with myself, as I was then looking for somebody else to meet my emotional needs by sleeping around. Again, there was nothing wrong with me doing that. Yeah. But what was wrong with that was that I was trying to gain a sense of self-worth through that process, which is never a good idea.
No, I think if anyone's going through a phase where they're hooking up with lots of people, it's you're trying to get a certain thing from it, but you're never going to get that thing from it. It's shopping in the wrong store. It's going to the grocery store and trying to buy, I don't know, furniture or something like that. Yeah, you're there and you're shopping, but you're not going to find what you're looking for.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. And I think that that's what I worked out. So it was really interesting, if I think back now, is I almost went from one extreme to the other. I went from sleeping around with anybody and putting myself in situations that were actually quite dangerous at times as well, to then going to the other end of the spectrum and pretty much becoming celibate, because I was trying to work on myself. And I think it's trying to find this healthy balance as well, because I don't think either are wrong, but I don't think either are right either. You've got to find a healthy relationship with yourself and other people.
Yeah, it's finding the balance between being open to the opportunity of the right thing. The right thing is like the wrong language, but being open to what you're looking for coming through the door, but then finding the balance between not seeing anyone and then seeing everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, with the friendship thing, that's really been interesting for me, because I think too, intimacy happens within friendships as well. Because we're wanting to connect with others, and especially because of the last couple of years, I think we're craving depth of connection with others, but we're still trying to socially integrate back into society again, because we've kind of have been shut off. So I think we're all trying to understand how we function in the world. And I know for me personally is that I did have a lot of changes within relationships during the last couple of years. And it was really interesting to even see the differences of how I dealt with that. I still also, I don't know if tolerate's the right word, but I think because my day-to-day is so of being in service to other people, because I love the work that I do, is that if somebody couldn't meet me halfway in a relationship, I just was like, I didn't want to be somebody's second option. So there were a couple of friendships that I had where I had to go, And I did, because I can be a real people pleaser, but I was kind of on the sidelines going, oh, I really want to nurture this relationship. But what happens when I don't give to it? And that was really interesting to observe, because as soon as I stopped giving, crickets, hi.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate reality, I think, sometimes of adult relationships is you want to feel your relationship is a priority to your friend, but sometimes you realize when you stop putting in the effort how little the other person was actually giving you. And it is frustrating and hurtful because you're, well, I've been showing up to this. It's almost a sense of rejection because you're, well, I mean, everyone's busy. We can't really use that as an excuse anymore.
Absolutely. And look, I'm probably a very terrible friend to Kim. She's always the one texting me, rallying me up to do something. But I suppose on the flip side of that, you know that I'll always show up. You just have to give me a nudge and be, hey, hi, where are you at? And I'm here. Yep, awesome. Get me out of the house.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's also, yeah, knowing how your friends are too makes the difference, because sometimes it's like if you know that someone is that, then you're okay, well, this isn't a personal thing because it's you do show up when you show up, which is the difference between a friend who's not showing up unless you literally go and drag them into whatever you're doing, or that constantly reschedules or feels unreliable. Accountability is so important to me. It's someone who says that they're going to do something and they do it. That is one of my favorite qualities in a person.
Well, I think because then at least you know where you stand.
Yeah, and you can trust them because when they say they're going to do something, they do it. And I think if you are the kind of person that struggles with trusting people, I would say I don't always easily trust people. And so if at the beginning I get the vibe that you're not kind of accountable in that way, I'm just going to immediately shut it down because I don't want to bother with that.
How can you deepen the connection within your relationships? Have you got some tips for us? Whether it's with an intimate partner or a friendship, how do we foster that?
Such a good question. I remember when we were at school a little while ago, they were talking about the appropriate levels of disclosure, which I thought was really interesting because they were talking about how you build trust in relationships and how it's when you first meet someone, first it's you're kind of sussing each other out, and then you sort of get to know each other, and then you can build trust from there because over time you have more experiences, and then that gives you sort of more a lay of the land of who this person is, and it takes time to build it. It definitely happens over time. But I'm sure like knows how some people are just, they just overshare everything. You meet them and straight away they're telling you all their deepest, darkest secrets. It makes you uncomfortable. That person's not following the appropriate levels of disclosure. So I think it's kind of one of those things that it's knowing that trust takes time to build. And then also knowing that those levels of disclosure is a process, not a process that needs to be minded. It's not like you're, okay, on meeting 3, we're going to talk about my childhood trauma. It's not like that, but it's more just being aware of the level of relationship and closeness you have and sharing things that are appropriate to that level. And slowly over time, you will build that connection. I think another thing that's really important is open communication. So many of us, we talk, but we're not actually communicating with each other. We're saying one thing, the other person thinks we're saying something else, or even when it comes to being a good listener, I'm sure all of us have had that experience where you're having a conversation and the other person just talks and talks and talks and you don't get a single word in. That really is a great way to kill connection. So yeah, just being a good listener, asking good questions, trying different things and having different experiences together. I think that's what really ultimately builds connection over time. I mean, psychology teaches us that basically we like people who are kind of like us and in close proximity to us. And also there's the mere exposure effect, which is basically the more time you spend with someone, the more you're going to like them. So it's all of those things that are necessary for building a friendship or a relationship. It's spending time together, sharing things, building trust with each other, and going through different experiences. I think I shared this with you a little while ago, but it was the scary bridge study where they had 2 different bridges, and one was a super high scary suspension bridge over some rapids, and the other one was just a normal little footbridge. And so what they told the participants they were doing is they were like, you have to walk across the bridge. In the middle of the bridge, there's going to be a female Confederate, and she's going to ask you some questions, and then they said that that was it. But actually what they were testing is the level of arousal that you got from going on the really high bridge was going to be higher. You feel elevated heart rate, you're a little bit afraid. And so that actually like tricked the male participants into thinking they were attracted to the female researcher. And the way that they measured this was she would be, oh, here's my number. If you have any questions about the study later, you can call me. And I think it was 80% of the people on the scary bridge ended up calling her versus 20% on the non-scary bridge. So you can kind of, not that we want to manipulate people into liking us, but it's really just interesting to see how your psychology can be kind of tricked almost in a way by you misplacing the reason for those emotions is you thinking you're attracted to the researcher versus it just being you misinterpreting your emotions.
Do you know what? I found that even with friendships, people just somehow embed themselves into your life. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, hang on, did I even sign up for this relationship?
So true.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So, what I'm hearing from you is a few key things. And I wanted to kind of highlight them now is that communication is really important within a relationship.
Yeah.
Trust is really important in a relationship. And also, relationships take work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a thing that you can ever rush. It happens over time. You can't force a connection to happen faster than you want it to. And also, you have to kind of have the same goals. You need to both either want to be in a relationship or a friendship, or you need to have a shared vision for what the two of you are together. Because if one person wants one thing, someone else wants something else entirely, it's going to be sort of a mismatch.
And I think that's a really great point to bring up because there's a lot of people that I see as well that have been in a relationship for a really long time. And what tends to happen, whether it's going through a different chapter in your life, it could be through starting a business, deciding if you want to become a parent, becoming a parent. It could be a particular life stage, especially if you are moving into your 40s or 50s. And like anything in life, people change, our values change, what we want in life can sometimes change as well, especially if we have experienced something that does change our life circumstances. And so it's really important that you are having some form of connection or dialogue, or you're coming together in some way to make sure you're still moving it forward in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, especially if it's a long-term relationship, I think people get busy or you're paying less attention to it. So I think with everything that's important, it is important to have a sense of intentionality about how you do things. Okay, we have goals for everything else, but what are the goals for the relationship? And I don't just mean getting married or moving in together. It's about, okay, we're going to see each other this much every week, or this amount of contact feels good for me, or just always being really clear with how you communicate what your needs are and not letting that resentment build up. Because I think resentment is really what kills a lot of relationships. Because I think a lot of the time people don't understand how to communicate properly what their needs are and what's going on. And we kind of just expect the other person to know when one thing could be happening in your mind, but in their mind, something completely different is happening or they don't even notice. So it's really almost over communicating instead of just assuming that they're doing something quote unquote bad. I think, especially if people are in heterosexual relationships, I think this comes up a lot because you sometimes assume that guys are doing something where they shouldn't be doing it. But what if they have a reason for doing what they're doing? A really good book is The Queen's Code by Alison Armstrong. And she kind of just writes it almost, it's in a story style, but she's giving you different points about how to be really effective in heterosexual relationships. I assume it would work in same-sex relationships too, but the dynamic's a little bit different if it's two women or two men, because you have a bit more understanding when you communicate.
And I love that you brought that up as well, because when I share some astro insights in a moment, is that I'm doing these based on placement, not based on what type of relationship that you're in. It purely doesn't matter. You can be in a same-sex relationship or a heterosexual relationship. That's the cool thing about astrology. It doesn't have any biases. Nothing is good or bad. It's just about you trying to find your equilibrium.
Yeah, 100%. Do you find that there's any natal placements that make you more inclined to be of a certain, like, I guess, prefer a certain kind of relationship? Does that ever show up?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm not going to share it publicly on the podcast because I'm still exploring it, because astrology is essentially patterns. and you're spotting patterns. And I remember actually having this conversation with my first astrology mentor, Narelle, who's been such a key influence in even my work as an astrologer today. And I remember asking her the same question because I had started to notice a pattern but more so because 90% of the people I work with are women, and I only have a small amount of men or people that identify as men that I work with. And so I was starting to notice a particular pattern between woman to woman relationships.
Interesting.
And so I asked her, and that's something that she hadn't actually picked up on. And so she said to me, she said, what I'd love you to do is look for that pattern. And so that's what I've been doing, is I've been looking to see if that is something, but also too, I never want to assume, and I never want to project just because I might have seen something. Again, I don't want to project a bias onto somebody else because I might see that same placement and then I'm like, oh, and they're in a woman to male relationship. So I'm working on it, babes.
Yeah, totally. So interesting.
For me, because I have Mercury in Virgo, it's in the second house, as I'm all about joining dots. I'm all about synthesizing information or what's the pattern here. And I think that's why I'm so obsessed with astrology, because I am always joining dots and it satiates my curiosity.
Yeah, totally. Sometimes we think that life is totally random, but I think astrology gives us a language to understand the patterns of the energies of how things come up. And I always think it's so interesting.
I'm popping in with a quick public service announcement, and that is the most important part of the Cosmic Hotline is you. Have an astrology question you need answered? Nothing is off limits. Whether it's a question about your natal chart, the 411 on Mercury retrograde, or what is the significance of a particular transit or activation. Submit your question today with no strings attached, or select the option to have your question answered live, just like an astrology session I'd have with a client. Text or call 043 17 Venus or submit your question via the show notes below. So while we're talking about this, I thought I'd give everyone a little bit of astro tea. I'd love to be able to say when it comes to sex and intimacy and our relationships that there's just one placement to look towards, but that's not the reality. There's so many different layers to unlock, and I'd love to be able to go through all of them, but in a short amount of time, I wouldn't be able to anyway. To give everyone some context, I took a love and relationships master coaching astrology course with a celebrity astrologer based in the US in 2021. The course in itself only scratched the tip of the iceberg, and I think it was 40 hours of learning, which is just so crazy. Yeah. And it's purely because there's so many different layers. But I suppose the top key point I wanted to highlight is how do you sustain a relationship? And what you actually need to look towards is your ascendant and your descendant. So your ascendant is based on how others see you, and it is related to joy and exhilaration, whereas your descendant is on the seventh house cusp. And that's essentially what type of love that you're looking for. And so looking there is really useful. It's helpful. But then we need to actually look at your sun placement. Your sun is so important because it's who you are, and it's going to impact how you're going to operate in a relationship. This is key. And that's why I think it's really sexy to know your sun sign inside and out. Obviously, your natal chart is main character energy, but there's so much you can obtain just from your sun placement. Now, your moon placement is representative of your basic needs. It's your instincts, and it's going to impact how you get your emotional needs met. And obviously, Kim and I have been talking a lot about this and trying to meet your own, but having a look towards your moon it's going to tell you how you show up in a relationship. To give you an example here, if you have a moon in Cancer, is that you need someone that makes you feel safe. If you don't have safety and security in that relationship, it's not going to be a good thing. And you need also someone that's emotionally available because of the fact that you are so in touch with your emotions. So if you have a moon in Cancer, a really great tip is because you are ruled by the moon, is actually when you're connecting with someone for the first time is wait a full moon cycle, because a moon cycle takes 28 days to actually find out, is this person emotionally available within the relationship? If you're not necessarily seeing those green flags, but give it 28 days, you are going to need to give it 28 days to actually see, is this something worth for me to pursue, whether it's a friendship or significant other. Whereas both Kim and I, we have moon in Aries. Do you want to tell everyone how that shows up in a relationship?
It's funny because I think the more healing and work that I do and the more in touch I become with my emotions, because as an Aquarian, that's something I think I struggle with a little bit. I realized how fucking ragey you can be with an Aries moon. It's really interesting, especially if you're doing your own thing a lot and you're probably not going to set yourself off. But when it's not I would go and yell at someone or be angry with them, but it's just funny how quick that anger comes to the surface, but then it also dissipates really fast. I don't hold a grudge, but I can be very feisty and passionate and very impatient about a lot of things.
Yeah, I say Moon and Aries people, we know what we want and we're going to know straight away if we're ready to. Yeah, exactly. And it's right. This person, oh, that person's a vibe, not feeling it. It's very impulsive.
Yes. And it's sometimes I think I can almost be too quick to discount people, not just in relationships, but when I meet people, sometimes straight away I can just be like, nope. And sometimes if I actually do give them a chance and I get to know them a little bit better, I realize that I was actually wrong. Oh, there actually is something about this person that I can connect with. So it's just being aware of that and being, okay, I've noticed that I can be that, and not to discount my intuition, but also give people a chance sometimes.
And do you know what I think the key element you shared then was connection. I think that connection for me is really important. And so if I don't find middle ground with somebody quite quickly or can build immediacy with them, then for me it lacks connection, which is maybe when I'm quick to go move on to the next thing, which is why I think I've loved becoming and stepping into this role as an astrologer, because I'm just naturally curious and want to learn more or know more about a person.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think sometimes also one of the gifts of knowing your natal chart is the more you kind of know yourself, I think you can show up as that more, and you're less apologetic about it because you know who you are and you know what you want. And I think it helps attract the people that are for you, but when you meet people, you're not hiding behind who you think you should be, and it just allows you to draw in the people that you actually want to be around even more.
Oh, absolutely. And, and this is you brought up a really great point then, because at the end of the day, it could be astrology, it could be 16 personalities, it could be, I don't know, reading a book on Enneagram or human design. As long as you have a tool or a vehicle to get to know yourself, that is going to help you to cultivate a deep sense of self-awareness. That's going to help you to get where you need to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, we've spoken a lot about communication. I've also got a previous episode on the Cosmic Hotline all about learning and communication. But just know that Mercury is so important. There's enough said with that. Communication, from my perspective, is a cornerstone of any relationship. It's interesting. I'll use Kim as an example. So Kim has Mercury in Capricorn. And so how that can show up in relationships, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, Kim, is that you are really direct. You know what you need to know what's going on. You need to be really clear on that as too, right? You don't want to fuck around. And if you do sense from somebody that they're there to mess you around, you're going to want to move on to the next thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes I can be very quick to ice people out as soon as something is coming up in a relationship. And if I've maybe tried to communicate about it a couple times, or I've tried to mention it and it's not received, I can be very quick to ice people out, which is not always a good trait. I think it is good to have boundaries. It's good to know when something isn't for you, but I think sometimes it's about finding that middle ground. Sometimes I don't know how to be in the in between. I'm very either or person. I'm either 100% there or I'm not at all. And it's very hard for me to find that middle ground sometimes.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? Whether it's astrology or just in life, we're always trying to find our own version of equilibrium. It's always about how do you find your center. And that's why I say nothing is good or bad in astrology. There's just polarity of energy, which is why I call it high vibration versus low vibration. And if you have too much of either, that can not necessarily be a good thing, probably from a psychology lens. So it is that middle ground is key.
Yeah, it's like with everything, especially when there's other people involved, it's learning to compromise is huge, and it's not always easy. I think when I look at my chart, I see a lot of independence and I'm doing things my own way, and I don't necessarily care if anyone comes with me on that path. And I think that can sometimes make it hard to compromise with others because I'm like, no, I really want to go and do this thing. And I'm happy to go and do it by myself. And sometimes that's not always the best thing in relationships. I think sometimes you do really need to learn when to fight for what's important, but also knowing to pick your battles, basically.
Absolutely. Now, when it comes to how you give and receive love, that's when you look towards your Venus placement. And Kim, you gave us a really great example earlier because you have Venus and Cap. So you're all about building something with someone. And that's a perfect example. To give another example, say, for instance, you have Venus and Aries, but essentially you want quick love. You want fast love. You know what you want, and you might get bored if things aren't moving at your pace. And so if somebody doesn't necessarily, so say, for instance, you're single and you have Venus and Aries, if you're not getting that response quick enough, you're probably going to move on to the next thing. So that's kind of how you can start to work with your natal chart and how this shows up. But then the other placement that I'd love you babes to look towards your Mars placement, because Mars is so interesting, because I always call Mars the planet of our lust for life. It represents our drive, how we assert ourselves, but really when it comes to relationships, it's how you attract somebody based on your own Mars placement, but also who you're attracted to. And so, for example, is that I have Mars and Leo. And so when people think of Leo, somebody might listen to this and go, oh my God, that's all about sex. Well, it's actually not. It's not necessarily focused on the act of sex. It's more about the feeling of love. It's all about love and compassion and feeling something that's real. And so this type of person, me, I need to be shown love. And love happens through loyalty. And so this element that we've been talking about today, which is trust and building trust with somebody. I think you even mentioned earlier before, Kim, you said that when somebody says they're going to do something, integrity, right? That you want them to do it. That's how I view Mars and Leo. And so these are some examples of how you can start looking at your natal chart and diving into a little bit more. It's not just one key placement, it's a whole multitude.
Yeah, and it's how do all those things interact? And I think sometimes in this lifetime, I got it easy because everything in my chart is in the same kind of energy and the same house. But I think even looking at the synergy of how those things work together, and of course, everyone can look at the synergy of their chart and how those things kind of play off of each other. But what do you think happens if people have placements and things are in very conflicting desires? What would you tell them?
Yeah, and that's such a great question. It happens a lot as well, because that's the thing. We always have duality in charts. Say, for instance, might have Venus and Pisces. So Venus being how you give and receive love. Having Venus and Pisces, it's you actually want to be at one with your partner. But they may be an Aquarius, or they may have their their partnership's house ruled by Aquarius. And so what that means is that they're looking for depth of connection, but if they feel caged in, they're going to want to run in the other direction. And so it's making sure that you can find a partner or friendships that honor both parts of who you are, that when you are with that person that you are wanting to, be with them, whether that's through physical touch or intimacy, or feeling that you can create this deep sense of connection through communication, while at the same time having the freedom to pursue your own goals, your own dreams. And that's really important, because even if I think of really simple placement, a Libra sun person, it's really important for a Libra sun to actually find their own identity within a relationship. And I even had somebody say to me the other day, she was like, I take pride in the fact that I'm a chameleon and I can change who I am. And I was like, hold up. I was like, sure, great for influencing people, but let's be real. What's your identity if we peel back the layers of you being a chameleon? And that, I think, really stopped her in her tracks, because at the end of the day, you've got to be able to find somebody that fits into the piece of the puzzle that allows you to be you, but also honors all parts of who you are.
Yeah, oh my God, 100%. I think it's so interesting. It just reminded me of something that we talked about in school, because there's in social situations, you have low self monitors and high self monitors. And so high self monitors are exactly that. They're very aware of what's going on around them, and they very much moderate their personality to kind of suit the situation, which sometimes is appropriate. Other times it can be almost like you've gone too far that direction. And then low self monitors, that's the person that just shows up and they're so themselves in every single situation, but almost to the point where maybe it would be more appropriate if they tone down that aspect of themselves in other certain situations. They almost kind of go in with a bull in a china shop energy, and they're just there, but they don't notice it, but everyone else around them does. So it's the same with that spectrum of how you can be, and being on either end is probably not super positive.
Oh, and that it's all about finding that center, that core, that middle ground. And I think that how you do that is not only having self-awareness, but then communicating that to others, communicating it in a way that it's not just, this is who I am, this is my natal chart, deal with it. Because I think that is the worst way to use
totally.
astrology, because you're bypassing the human experience. It's more about going, this is how I currently show up in the relationship, or what I tend to do. These are my behaviors, my thoughts, feelings, and actions. But I also want to grow and evolve within this relationship too. And so this is what I do, but let me hear about what you do. Or you have to have some form of open dialogue so that you can move together. Because let's be realistic, no fucking relationship is unicorns, lollipops, and rainbow confetti.
No, and that's one of the things that really kind of like annoys me about the whole, I guess, Disney princess era is I feel I really misinformed people a lot about what relationships were supposed to be. And I guess obviously I'm not growing up now, so I don't know if they maybe feel that differently. But I think at that point in time, it was very much, oh, you get married and then you live happily ever after. And it didn't really give people the tools or the expectation, even that everything, not, I don't know. I mean, it sounds wrong to say that relationships are all going to be hard work, because I don't necessarily think that's always going to be true. Of course, there should be periods where you're just enjoying it and it is good and it doesn't have to feel super hard all the time. But I think it does take a degree of working on yourself and consciously working on the relationship to make it work, and just acknowledging that it's not always going to be perfect.
Absolutely. So I'm really curious. We've had this epic conversation today on relationships and psychology and astrology. And I always love our conversations, Kim, because they go in so many different directions, but we always meet right back at the beginning. And one of the first questions I asked you was what you'd learned about yourself through studying clinical psychology. But I'd love to know, you've shared some really amazing insights based on what you've learned about relationships, but what have you learned about yourself in relationships through studying clinical psychology?
Oh my God, this is such a good question, because I really feel the whole thing that put me onto this path, in a way, it was relationships. Because I remember when I first heard about RTT hypnotherapy, which is the kind of hypnotherapy that I practice, I heard about it on a podcast. I was really intrigued. And I remember at the time I had just gone through a breakup and I was getting really frustrated because I felt like I kept dating people and having the same issue every single time. And I was just like, okay, well, obviously, if I keep attracting the same kind of person every single time, I'm the common denominator. There's something going on for me, and I just really can't seem to get at what it is. I'm very confused. So I was on Google. I was like, TT hypnotherapist in Australia. I found one actually. And so I was like, let's just book in a session. What's the worst that could happen? And so the thing that really blew me away is once we got in there and we started looking at what were my subconscious beliefs about relationships, I really associated relationships are painful. People are going to let you down. You can never ultimately trust someone. It's unsafe for you to be in a close partnership with someone. And when I came out of it, I was just like, light bulb moment. Of course, if that's what you believe on a subconscious level, your subconscious really dictates. They say 80% of your behavior. It's kind of an arbitrary number, but basically it's a lot. So here's me on the surface going around trying to date people, but deep down not really wanting to date someone. So that's why I kept attracting all these very superficial relationships. And so that was kind of the thing that really made me realize, I was like, oh, there's a whole lot more that's going on in here that maybe I don't know about. So I started the hypnotherapy training because I was so blown away by the results that it had given me and just the clarity and the awareness. But through doing more of that work, because when you're training for it, you have to practice with other people. So I ended up getting a lot of hypnotherapy sessions on a variety of things. And the thing that really came up for me the most is low self-worth. I just didn't believe that I was worthy of a relationship. I didn't believe in myself. I just had really low self-esteem. That really affected it. And also, the other one that they really talk about a lot is just not believing that something is available to you. And that was really what came up for me the most, is just not valuing myself, not believing that it was possible for me. And that's why I kind of kept attracting those same relationships. And then when I finally did end up going to university, we haven't maybe studied relationships exactly per se, but the things that come up about self-worth and how that makes you feel, how that makes you react to certain situations, and also just the bias you have about yourself and not realizing the beliefs and the bias that you have about the world and how much that really does affect what happens to you, which is really what, like, to me, that's what manifestation is all about. It's uncovering the beliefs of the reality that you're kind of creating for yourself, and then kind of picking apart what's working for me, what's not working for me. If it's not working for me, how can I start to heal this thing?
I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. And if you love the Cosmic Hotline, please make sure you hit subscribe and rate us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you love to listen. I'll be back next week and I'm going to give you the full tea on everything you need to know to navigate not only Aquarius season, but more importantly, the Aquarius new moon that's on the horizon. It's one of my favorite times of the year, and I cannot wait to give you some astrological insights. So until next week, I hope you stay celestial.